Good morning. Please forgive me for a minute. I am currently restructuring my setup and it is far from done, so that's why we've got a little bit of an odd thing going on here today. But I have some things to say about the state of Star Wars fandom, and the Acolyte after thinking that I was done with it after it got canceled because that was supposed to be the final blow of it. But things happened after the Acolyte got canceled. Now, just to do a little recap for those who aren't familiar, my history with the Acolyte is I wasn't interested in it, wasn't really covering it, wasn't really following it. And then just the discussion about it started to ramp up so much. I did a video about my honest opinions on Star Wars today. I had done a video similar to it last year about why I stopped caring about Star Wars, but I kind of got back into the fray because this Acolyte thing just got to be so huge, and it felt like such a pivotal moment in Star Wars history, and I think that a lot of people recognize that and feel that. But the Acolyte, not surprisingly, got canceled. What was a bit more surprising is that Disney announced it and just let everyone know after they hadn't been announcing cancellations for shows and they've just quietly moved on from things. They announced that this was canceled, and it felt like quite a statement. And what we found after that is that even the Acolyte merch had disappeared from the Disney store. Now, it might be back. I have to check, but last I checked, they even removed the Acolyte merch from the store. And so it was a strong statement from Disney that, and I believe it was from Disney, not Lucasfilm, that they are moving on from that show after just, how low the viewership was, because it was a very expensive show. The viewership was low and got a lot of vitriol online and a lot of negativity. And I watched the last 3 episodes of the show, and at first I said that it was just kind of par for the course for Disney Star Wars, and I felt like the show was just taking the brunt of people's frustrations. That was until I saw the finale, and with the finale, just the rundown, the finale is basically saying that evil is good and that Osha, the main character, was right to kill her father, and that it's just such a messed up show in that the idea behind it, like they make it so this guy Soul was just so obsessed with these 2 little girls that he's seen for 2 seconds wanting to save them, that he accidentally killed their mother over a misunderstanding, but he's supposed to be the evil one. It's just, I called it clown writing. It really is. It really is clown writing in every sense of the word. You can go back and watch my reviews for those episodes if you want to hear more. But what surprised me was after the show got canceled, I saw more defense for the show and more love for the show than when it was airing. That was so confusing because when it first came out, and I did a video on this as well, it seemed like everyone was against it by episode 3. Like even the Star Wars subreddit, everyone everywhere seemed against this show. Mainstream critics were against it and everything. Then by episode 4, there started to be some defense for it coming out, and I wondered if that was an attempt, because companies do astroturfing and all that, and you can never be sure. I was like, is this because I'm just seeing more defense now as things are coming to my feed because we're all in our little bubbles on the internet, or is it that Disney is trying to release defense for this show? I don't know, but at the time, it was just interesting that it was only then that I started to see a lot of defense for the show, and it could mean nothing. It could be genuinely people on the internet trying to defend it. But even then, when the finale came out, I did not see this much love or defense for the Acolyte until now that it's been canceled, and it's been going on for like 2 weeks now, where there's just all of these accounts defending the Acolyte and disparaging anybody who was against the Acolyte, and a petition has started to bring the Acolyte back, and last I checked, it was about to 70,000 signatures. Now, there's something that you need to be careful when it comes to that, is that, first of all, you can make different accounts to drive up signatures, but even if every single one of those signatures is valid, like 70,000 people for a show, like that's not going to bring the Acolyte back, and it's not going to save it if it ever came back on air, just given that scenario, because you can't survive a show that has 180 million price tag on it, costs over $600,000 a minute as recorded. You need millions of people to watch that show. You can't just have under 100,000. You need millions to watch that show. So while the petition is there to show support of the show, it actually shows how little, relatively speaking, support there is. And once again, that's not even factoring in how many of those signatures could be from multiple accounts or things like that. But here's the thing: is it's just this very loud group, very specifically on Twitter, that is defending the show almost out of nowhere, because I did not see this defense of the show when it was coming out, and not even on the Star Wars Reddit. Like, they seem pretty accepting, like, this show is dead, obviously. But on Twitter, there's this narrative that's forming of that Disney canceled it because of toxic Star Wars fans, and it was the vitriol that made them cancel the show. Now, I think that the amount of vitriol that could be heard was probably an influencer, but ultimately, like, what you have to know is that nobody on the internet represents the majority. Like, Twitter does not represent real life. YouTube does not represent real life. And I'll give an example of that. When Captain Marvel was coming out, there was more vitriol against her and that character than pretty much anything that you've ever seen. Like, it was an entire industry to just hate on Brie Larson, and that fooled me because I was a Marvel fan, and Carol Danvers, the original version, I've been rereading the original comics, and I actually kind of like the 80s version of the character, but I was willing to give the movie a chance as a Marvel fan, and I got fooled by all the vitriol online thinking, oh, does this mean the movie's gonna bomb because everyone's so mad and everyone has already decided that they hate this character? But then the movie made $1 billion, and there were some crazy conspiracy theories that came out that was like, oh, they paid they paid entire theaters to make it seem like it was successful. No, it was a Marvel movie coming out in 2019. There was only one superhero movie in general that year that did not make $1 billion. The superhero genre was just that popular with the mainstream, and we were all willing to give a new character a chance at the time. And that just goes along with Marvel's track record, like Ant-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy, all were given new chances from people, and that was just on the same trajectory. But that is an example I want to use, that vitriol on the internet, whether it's from YouTube or Twitter or wherever it is, does not ultimately represent majority. It can perhaps reflect people, but ultimately it should not be taken as proof of real life, because it's all just its own little bubbles. Now, what I want to highlight again is it was the amount of people watching The Acolyte to review it, no matter how they reviewed it, could not get those numbers up, because the amount of people who are actually watching the show to review it are not that very many. So it's not because people were vitriolic about the show that made it end. It was because the show was not getting any viewership, because it cost $180 million once again, and it was, by the end of the show, one of the lowest viewed, I think it was the lowest viewed finale for any Star Wars show. And of course, they're going to cancel it. Like, and people are acting online like that is some sort of shock, but that's how TV has always worked. If you can't put up and make your money back, or make your audience back, or see that you're doing any kind of benefit for the studio that is producing the money for this, or providing the resources, or the investors who are providing those resources, then you're not going to continue. That's the way it's always been. There's been shows that are critically acclaimed that have been canceled after one season. There's been shows that have been panned that have continued on longer just because they found some kind of audience. Movies like the Transformers movies, or the Disney live action remakes, things that get a lot of vitriol keep happening because there's still money to be made there. Like, it's ultimately about the money when it comes to Hollywood. Getting a petition of like 70,000 people or so is not going to bring the show back, because it's not going to be enough people to watch the show to justify that price tag. And then there's the question of how many of these people were actually watching the show. And once again, could be wrong here, but where were you guys when the show was coming out? I didn't see all this defense for the glories of The Acolyte when it came out, and there's just odd things that people are saying, like, we're never going to explore a universe that doesn't have to do with the Skywalkers after this. There's been Star Wars content that has explored things without the Skywalkers forever. Like, there was recently the game Star Wars Outlaws, which is another example of something that does not focus on the Skywalkers. The Mandalorian does not necessarily focus on the Skywalkers. The Old Republic is an entire franchise within a franchise. It's just ridiculous to say that The Acolyte is suddenly the only thing that focuses on Star Wars without the Skywalkers. And it's just comments like that make me suspicious. And I don't like it when people make judgments on me, on what I've read and all that, but I just wonder, Like, how invested were you guys actually in Star Wars before the defense of the show? And I just think that a lot of the defense of the Acolyte is coming less because of the show itself and more because of the idea of the show and the idea that Disney is moving away from this. And because that's what you get with all of these articles coming out saying that is this Disney giving in to the toxic fans? Is this putting Star Wars in a bad direction? It's like they're not really defending it as a show. They're defending the idea of the show because this was supposed to be Star Wars for a different audience. This was supposed to subvert the original lore of it. This was supposed to take it in a very different direction. And so what people seem to be really upset about, in my opinion, is moving away from the changing of Star Wars, like the uprooting of Star Wars and changing it into something different. And I don't think that people want to feel that they've lost in that area because they want it to change. They want to get rid of the old fan base and they want it to be something different. But like I've said before, you can't do that. It's like a YouTuber who tries to completely change their brand after they built an audience. You're just going to lose the audience and not gain many people in return. It just doesn't work like that. And Disney is realizing this. And Disney, shock of all shocks, people are just starting to realize is ultimately motivated by money. Like the reason why they tried to change Star Wars in the first place is because they're motivated by money and they thought it would be profitable. It's not profitable, so they're moving on to something else. It might not be something good, but that's why they're moving on. And the ultimate reason is because there is not a big audience for this kind of thing. And the general audience has rejected it. The general audience is not interested in Star Wars anymore. Like Star Wars Galaxy's Edge was a failure. Merchandise sales are down and all of that. And Disney is noticing and they're not liking that. Like there's no one to blame. The audience just doesn't exist. But with the blame game, I want to talk about this idea because there's so many excuses that are coming out in terms of explaining where the Star Wars fandom is at. And there's this new excuse that's come out really trying to attack the people who are fans of George Lucas Star Wars to say the reason why George Lucas left Star Wars is because fans were so toxic and they didn't agree with his vision. And first of all, that's a very recent thing that's come off. And I'm like, who are you blaming, first of all? I was like a couple months old when The Phantom Menace came out. I grew up thinking that those movies were the greatest thing in the world. And as I got older, I realized that they had more flaws. But I was never vitriolic against George Lucas's Star Wars. I still love the prequel films because you can love things that are flawed. But it's just something that's made in terms of an attack against the Star Wars fan base to say that it's somehow our fault and that it's our fault for not accepting whatever Star Wars becomes. And I'll just say the reason why Star Wars gets so much, people say Star Wars fans are toxic. They're not toxic. They're passionate. When you really love something and you're passionate about it, you're concerned for the direction that it's going in. And that's ultimately what it was about when the prequels came out and there were criticisms. And that is what it's about now. And you're not obligated, even as critics, we're not obligated to like everything. Someone can believe that the prequels were bad and the sequels were bad. And that's more on the people behind the scenes for what they've made than how people react to that. But it's also fair because there were always people who grew up loving the prequels at the same time. And, we can defend what we defend and disagree with what we disagree with and back that up. It does not make someone toxic to dislike something or like something. However, on the subject of toxic fandom and all of that, I would like to maybe put up a mirror to the people who are making all those accusations and assumptions and name calling of the people who criticize this show. The Acolyte was just so widely criticized. Like, film theorists did a negative video on it, and Jeremy Jahns did a negative video on it, and Moist Critical. Like, this was a very criticized show. And I've seen people throw vitriol at Jeremy Jahns for criticizing this show. He is always very fair in his criticisms. Vitriol's been thrown at me. It's been thrown at everyone. And I knew that was going to happen if I dared to cover The Acolyte. And that was part of the reason why I absolved myself from the Star Wars fandom in the first place, because I didn't want that. But as I've been brought back into the fray and talking about it again, I would like to speak, and I know that probably none of these people are ever going to see this video, but I would like to just speak towards that for a minute, is if you want to talk about toxic fandom for a minute, like, Imagine being afraid or being nervous about covering a show honestly, just because you know that no matter what you say, because you covered a show negatively, you're gonna get vitriol thrown at you and people making judgments on your moral character because you didn't like a show. Is that not toxic? Like, people came after the film theorists, and I was seeing them call them names and all kinds of stuff. Only on Twitter. Like, this stuff is just only on Twitter. It's not reality, but that does exist. And it's like, so is your guys' strategy basically to scare people and threaten them out of not talking about a show at all because they're so afraid about having stuff said against them? Like, I think that that's the reason why a lot of these mainstream outlets, or what I should say, mainstream YouTubers didn't want to cover Star Wars in such a negative fashion because I don't think they wanted that. But I think that The Acolyte was kind of a breaking point where it's like they can't pretend to like these shows anymore because they're just so terrible. And that's what I'm thinking with these people on social media who are just calling everyone but themselves toxic. And to be fair, you know, pointing out people going at Amanda Stenberg's Instagram and just writing a lot of, you know, gloating about the show being canceled. I disagree with people doing that. When a show is canceled or something bombs, that's done. There's no reason to gloat. You shouldn't go to people's social media and talk like that at all. But it's just these people on Twitter calling everyone but themselves toxic. It's like you can respectfully criticize a show and have an opinion of a show without it being a reflection of your moral character. And these strangers on the internet have decided that you're an awful person no matter what you do because you didn't like a show that they commanded you to like. And I'm like, people get mad at me for covering The Acolyte. I'm like, so what you want me to do is you want me to pander to you and either not cover it at all or pretend to like it just so you wouldn't say bad things about me. And the more I talk about it, it's like, that's the actual toxic fan base. Like, the idea that people can't have opinions. Because I'm not saying you can have opinion of, well, you can like The Acolyte if you want. I might not understand it, but you can like it if you want. I don't care, but what I do care about is people who have decided that it is some sort of a judge on who you are as a person if you dislike a show and your motivations for disliking a show, and that it can be anything other than you don't think that it goes along with the Star Wars that you know, you don't think that it's well written, because there's all these ulterior motives now being attached to people who use the word bad writing, and now all of a sudden bad writing is a buzzword and a single for people just being a bad person in general and being like a secret, a closeted awful person who is just out there to just hate anything from modern Star Wars. But like, that's the true vitriol, and that's what I want to move away from, and that's what I'm so glad that Disney canceled that show, because we need to move away from that. We need things, because movies are supposed to bring people together, and Star Wars was supposed to do that. And I don't think catering to a small amount of people who are going to, who literally try to pressure you and threaten you to not talk about a show or to not talk about in a certain way, those are not the kind of people that you want to cater to at all. Why would you want those kind of people to be in your fan base? There's Star Wars fans who can be very overly passionate, who just also happen to care about Star Wars, and then there's people who are straight up going to be called a bad person if you dislike something. Like I've had unpopular opinions on this channel before, but the vitriol over those unpopular opinions, or vitriol isn't the right word for it, the blowback on that is just not the same as having somebody literally judge that you are a bad person for not thinking the way that they want you to. So it is good to get rid of these actual toxic Star Wars fans, if they are Star Wars fans, or if they just like the idea of it, or if they just like The Acolyte. Don't pander to these people who are just essentially bullies. Like, I'm looking at, like, you guys, if you happen to have found this video, understand from my perspective, you guys who are going to say awful things about me for having an opinion on a show, you guys are the bullies in my sight. It's not ever going to be fun for me to be a part of the Star Wars fan base again until that is gone, and that where that is not paid attention to. And I think that it will go away as soon as Disney does no longer seems like they're going to pander to those kinds of people and no longer thinks that those are the good people. And once they try to make things that are actually agreeable and actually people can enjoy and not be polarizing, that's a way for Star Wars to get back on track. But pandering to these people who may or may not have actually watched this show, who don't come up in that great of numbers, and who bully very well-established mainstream critics for not agreeing with their opinions on the show, like, those are the people you need to ignore, and they ironically do everything they accuse other people of doing. Like, they're mad at people for criticizing Disney and not loving everything they're doing with Star Wars. Now they're furious with Disney and because they're not doing what they love with Star Wars. It makes no sense. They're mad at people for being too negative, then something happens that they don't like, and then they're the ones that are too negative, but it's okay if it's from their side. But these are the people that we need to move away from. They are small people. They should not be listening to. It's like, I'm going to do a video about shipping. It's like, some shipper fan bases are good, but some of them are just crazy, and companies have fallen into the trap of pandering to them, and they need to stop. They need to stop listening to these people. But those are just my rambling thoughts on the state of the Star Wars fan base and the odd stuff. So I would just say, Disney, Lucasfilm, stop listening to these small voices on the internet and try to make things that everyone can enjoy together, and don't pay attention to the people who are going to who are going to make these kinds of accusations against somebody for criticizing a show. But that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for listening to my little rant. If you want to support my channel, please check out my Patreon, as these 10 wonderful people have done. And I will see you guys next time.